Frontline did a series about Putin, and they interview all these U.S. officials in their extremely candid, long interviews that are like almost like completely unedited, like an hour long each on YouTube. And I'd also recommend checking those out if you want to be extremely bored, but also learn something about, this new spin that's coming out from, a lot of these former Obama officials now, which is really interesting to me personally, are actually throwing Obama under the bus now and claiming that the policy failed on Russia. And they're all acting like they tried to push Obama to do more in Ukraine. Specifically, that's where it all started for them. And that it was a failure of policy.
Yeah, dude, if only Obama just sent arms to neo-Nazis earlier, then we would Russia would never have meddled in the election. Wow. What a weird train of thought.
Victoria Nuland in this interview, it's an hour long, basically almost seems like she tears up and implies, without saying it directly, that Obama's decisions in Ukraine actually cost Ukrainian lives, and his decisions led to the deaths of an unknown amount of Ukrainians.
Hard for you to lose that argument?
Very
personally?
Hard. Very hard. Because people were dying. And because I knew that they were fighting on their own soil for their own choices, and that the war in eastern Ukraine was completely artificial and Russia created.
And it was really interesting to watch, and it seemed very crocodile tears fake to me when she was kind of acting emotional about this. And I really started to think about it. There's been quite a few former Obama officials who have thrown him under the bus about his Russia policy and acted like he didn't do enough to stop what they're now describing as Russian meddling. And I could just go down the list really quick. It's, Hillary Clinton has expressed, she's complained in her own book. Joe Biden, I think it was a CFR talk recently, threw Obama under the bus. Julie Smith, the head of CNAS, a former Biden official, threw him under the bus. Michael McFaul, Mike Morrell, Robert Kagan, of course, did. But most recently, former National Security Committee member under Obama, Laura Rosenberger, went on this PR tour, basically, for the Alliance for Securing Democracy with the former spokesperson for the Foreign Policy Initiative, Jamie Fly.
Where I was really involved in trying to figure out the U.S. government's response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, taking Crimea, moving into eastern Ukraine, the shooting down of MH17. And to be candid, my own feeling coming out of that experience that we had both, we had failed and that we had failed on two levels. There was both a policy failure, in my opinion, but also there was an intelligence failure.
And they sort of presented this interview like, oh, look how neat it is that like the left and the right are joining together to fight Russian meddling.
That was Jamie Fly, one of my guests for this week, former foreign policy advisor to Republican Senator Marco Rubio. He and Laura Rosenberger, former national security advisor to Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign and a staffer on President Obama's National Security Council, are my guests this week. They're an unlikely bipartisan duo. They've teamed up to create the Alliance for Securing Democracy. The effort is to track Russian interference in our elections and to create a national dialogue around what should happen next.
And they're interviewing both of them. What really stuck out to me the most is basically going back to what we were talking about before, that the Alliance for Securing Democracy, if anyone's been listening to our podcast, is trying to depict all these trending hashtags on Twitter that are like far right and sometimes far left as being Russian driven. And often it'll just be something random like the Parkland shooting or like Monday, some like Monday hashtag, like Mondays suck or something will be like Russian driven, they'll say on their website. And they're using this black box algorithm that they call the Hamilton 68 dashboard to measure what they describe as 600 undisclosed Russian Twitter accounts, like Russian bot boosting Twitter accounts. And they won't say which 600 that these accounts are. They won't actually disclose them because they say that Russia will shut them down if they reveal which ones they are. So it's really fascinating what they're trying to do, because not only is this former official, Laura Rosenberger, saying that that it was a failure of policy and she feels like Obama really fucked us in terms of like fighting Russia, they also very much emphasize in this interview that Alliance for Securing Democracy is not claiming that Russia won the election for Trump. And this is actually an actual quote from Jamie Fly. He says, what the president is missing, what those on the right are missing, is that we're not drawing any conclusions about collusion. We're not making any statements questioning the legitimacy of Donald Trump's presidency.
We're not drawing any conclusions about collusion. We're not making any statements questioning the legitimacy of Donald Trump's presidency. I firmly believe that you can, if you're a Republican and you're a Donald Trump supporter, you can believe that he was legitimately elected president of the United States, and you can believe that he and his campaign did not collude with the Russians, and you can still be concerned about foreign interference in our democracy. It's a national security threat.
And I find that extremely fascinating because that was moving the goalposts even more. To be like, no. We're not making any argument about if Trump is colluding with Russia or if Russia made Trump win. No. All we're saying is that there is Russian meddling actively taking place in our country, like through social media. And that's really interesting goalpost move to me, because that is really where the end of this goes. Because that's something that you can actually prove a small kernel of truth of. You can say, yeah, Russia was doing these little things to try to like influence our political dialogue. But then the question becomes, did it have an effect, and what's the proportionality of it compared to all this other shit? I just went off on a long tangent, but I mean, what do you think about it?
I mean, it's the same thing that we've been talking about. It's changing the goalpost to now just broadening it. And yeah, I mean, it's just goes along with what we're saying and what we predicted. And still people are just quoting the think tank. Someone even told me that the other day, they're just like, oh, more Russian propaganda. And I was like, it literally would take 1 minute to just validate that this is who's running this think tank. Like now it's just Russian propaganda to talk about who Bill Kristol is and how he's a part of this. I mean, what are you talking about?
Well, it's so funny because in the interview, they actually bring that up. And the host is like, so Jamie and Laura, like, you know, Glenn Greenwald recently has started accusing you guys of being like a neocon. You're part of a neocon conspiracy. Like, what do you have to say? Are you guys neocon plants?
So, Jamie, what do you make of this critique that this is just some sort of a neocon conspiracy that you and Laura are foisting on us?
Well, I think when we're being attacked by the far left and the far right, that probably means we're doing something right. But
and they just kind of laugh. And then Jamie Fly goes on to say that, you know, Glenn Greenwald, he exemplifies this sort of consensus between the extreme right and the extreme left on Russia. Isn't that odd? You know, almost like kind of like saying he's a Russian bot, essentially.
Oh my God.
The whole interview it's boring. It's about an hour long, but it should be listened to in its entirety because you really do get the full picture of what narrative they're trying to weave. And I thought the most interesting thing from it was the fact that they are not trying to they're not trying to cover this whole larger narrative. They're not even touching the idea of Russian collusion with Trump.
That's fascinating.
It is fascinating because if that's where we're left with this, then that is that scary place where it's not, you know, it's not to just impeach Trump or to get rid of his people in his cabinet. It's to lock down and censor parts of the internet, or just to like police the internet or social media.
Unbelievable.
I just wanted to also just throw in there that Bellingcat, who was one of those guys who was really pushing the MH17 stuff, the Syrian chemical weapons attack stuff, and Miriam Elder, who, you know, I go after as sort of being a neocon stooge and a very heavy agenda. They've now sort of reneged on things in the sense that they are going against the Alliance for Securing Democracy now and saying that it's very problematic.
Why do you think that is? Because I find that really curious.
At first I thought it might just be a turf war. Like these are more Team Obama type people, like Miriam Elder and Bellingcat, and they're it's like a turf war with like the Team Hillary, like more watered down, like neoliberal sect of this whole DC class. Like almost like the Alliance for Securing Democracy has taken someone else's racket and run with it and like stolen it away from them or something. Especially that's right. How I would see the Bellingcat pushback. I actually tried to reach out to Eric Toller of Bellingcat. I said, will you, answer some questions about why you think Hamilton 68 dashboard is bunk? And his only response was, fuck no. So They don't want to talk about it. I mean, they mentioned it a little bit on Twitter, but they're not going to talk to anyone like us about it. But they are reneging to some degree on their contribution to this larger hysterical snowball about Russia. And Masha Gessen is also someone else who's doing that. As far as I'm concerned, was one of the biggest contributors to this hysterical snowball in the first place. Her articles about Ukraine and Pussy Riot in Russia back in like 2014 are identical to Jamie Kirchick's. And now she's even going against it, saying this has reached a hysterical point. We need to reel this back now.
It's important to call out who was a part of it. Just like how, Tucker Carlson and Ann Coulter are now like anti-war heroes to a lot of people. It's like, well, they were definitely part and parcel with the wave of Islamophobia that caused the death of millions of people in the Middle East. So I don't know why we would be lauding them at all. So yeah, I think we need to be really careful about anointing any of these people who were really essential to building up the Russophobia in the first place. Just be a little bit more hesitant. Like before, learn a little bit of who these people are that you see time and again being propped up as the main commentators, and just understand how they play a role in it as well. It's really, really important.